All right, so thank you so much for joining today. I am joined here today by a good friend of mine, Holly, and we're here to talk about a really important topic, and that's that idea of shoulding on yourself and what should you do in really, complex situations. And so, Holly, I want you to just take a minute. I don't know really how to introduce you because you are so many things. You are the wearer of many hats. And so I'll let you take it from here.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Megan, and thanks to all of you for being part of this conversation. I am, above all, I am a mom and a wife that is trying to navigate the world that we live in to make it just a little bit better for the next generation, my children and their children and their children. And so for work, I help organizations to do good things. I help them to do the good things that they say they would like to do. And I help managers to be good managers because employees that feel cared for are going to perform at a higher rate and have a higher satisfaction of life. And I help employees to feel good about the work that they do. And I have a history of working in the nonprofit sector, in higher ed, and in all of the other places because I have always been drawn to connect with talented people and help them use their strength and their passion to meet the world's deepest need. And that has taken me in industry all over the place, from technology to medical to manufacturing to retained executive search. And I have this distinct privilege of sitting with people in really difficult moments. I'm usually the person that fires people. I'm also the person who picks up the phone and tells them about an opportunity that could change their life. And the span of the life cycle of working men and women is pretty huge. And so I focus now on that narrow space between work and life and help individuals to have a better experience of the narrow space. I'm also the founder of a nonprofit called the Brave Women Project, which specifically serves professional women and helps them to have an experience of work and life that is so satisfactory that they can continue to be in the leadership tables to help solve problems in ways that women can, which are complementary to the way that men solve problems. And so I operate out of a place of there is room for everyone, there's a need for all of our talents, and I try to help people gear up to listen and be part of solutions.
Absolutely. It's awesome. And that's where I met you, was actually Brave Women Project. And it has been a phenomenal nonprofit. I love to explain it to others that it's not one of these like networking groups where you go and exchange business cards and give the elevator pitch and then just email each other until like either you nag each other to buy something or you die. It's really I want to get to know you as a person and how we can partner alongside each other and lift each other up and encourage each other. And it has really become, for me personally, my safe space, my safe haven. I've met some really incredible women through that organization. And so I'm forever grateful to you for just having that bravery to start it up and keep it going and keep it rolling too.
Thanks, Megan. Well, I have to say the brave space matters. I'm joined today. I can see Amy Hooper Hanna is in the audience. She is gonna, I hope, join in on the conversation. Amy is my co-author and co-creator of For She Who Grieves, Practical Wisdom for Living Hope. And this is a book where we took some of the intimacy that was formed by the Brave Women Project, some of the collaboration, the partnership, and the real support. And we put together a book that helps men and women to walk through grief. We don't ever get over grief, but we walk through grief. And so today's topic, the shoulding, it comes at a really sensitive time in life. And I'm really glad that Amy's here to add to the conversation. We shared a brain for 6 months as we put together the book. So I'm so happy that she's here to continue that conversation and pick up anything that I drop.
Awesome. And yeah, this is even something you and I were talking about. I gave my opening keynote presentation, the PHRA, and it was really on mental resilience and this uptick in mental health and suicide rates, especially among our younger generations. And, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? And that always leads, I feel like, into that, well, I should have done this. I should have done that. And one of the things I learned in positive psychology was that we should never should on ourselves, like stop shooting on yourself. And you and I know, started a conversation and you shared a story with me about an experience you had in the workplace. Would you be willing to kind of share that with everyone here?
Sure. The conversation that we had came at a really sensitive time. I've been a people and culture leader for most of my career in one way or another. And in my early 20s, I was in a role in a nonprofit, and we had experienced in the school district, a student died by suicide. And I was one of the community leaders that had the opportunity to step in and create a space for the grieving children, these students, these high school students, to come together with their families and grieve in a safe place with professionals surrounding them to help them navigate those very difficult moments. And having gone through some grief in life and spending time with Amy, really dialoguing and putting together this book, I thought I should be ready for anything that comes my way. But in the beginning of 2024, I experienced something that truly shocked me and shook me to my core. The company that I was working for was filled with incredible people, and I took my role so seriously as the head of people and culture that I made it my job to personally interact with every single employee in the company, to the point that I'd only been at the company for 5 months and I was voted employee of the year. The deep connection was really big. I don't, and for those of you who've interacted with me, nothing is light with me. I go deep in every way. And so the employees of the company meant something to me in such a real way. And one morning in the beginning of the year, I had received a couple of messages with some concern about a highly engaged employee who I knew personally, had had many interactions with, really was delighted by him, and had a great rapport with him. And the concern that was mounting just didn't make sense. And so, being in the HR space, I knew the protocol. You go to the first of kin, and you make those phone calls. And within a couple of moments, I discovered the tragic news that he was no longer with us. And in those moments, I had to assess the situation and act for my employees, for the company, take those necessary actions to communicate this very tragic, sad thing. But I also had to acknowledge for myself, wow, this is a moment that you've lived through before and that you've had some experience with, but it's never the same. And that's the thing about grief and death. It's never the same. You never have the same experience twice. And so I literally had the handbook, had the resources at the back, and I was doing a play by play very quickly as I was making my next move. I just earlier that week, literally the day before, I had reviewed our employee assistance program with all of the employees in the company. I had literally just talked with all of my employees about the first response when there is a concern. And so I thought, this is something that I am equipped to deal with. Why am I feeling so strange right now? And I had another conversation later that day with my dog is really excited to be in the room right now, you guys. He is so happy that we're having this conversation. He won't be quiet. So later that day, I found myself in a conversation with this young man's mother. And at the time, I had been working many hours away from home. I had been navigating a schedule that just didn't feel right to me, that didn't feel like it was in alignment. And I was actually hiring a nanny to care for my children over the summer. And I remember having this conversation with this young man's mom who was grieving. And she's telling me about this magnificent son of hers. And I just had to stop and take a moment for myself and ask myself, what am I doing? So that started a life-changing experience for me, because I'm a working girl. I love work. I love an office. I love structure. I love having a boss. I love policies. I love company events. Oh my gosh, give me all the structure. I would love it. I love even the horrible moments where you have to come alongside people and deliver difficult things like an EAP or a PIP, or all of those acronyms HR people love. I love that stuff because it is such a privilege to be in the room with someone on a really bad day and love them and be compassionate and empathetic. So all this is happening as we're delivering this message. to the employees of the company that we had lost one of our own and how tragically we lost him, and preparing and making things available to all the other employees who had a relationship with him also. And so this is all happening in my heart as my hands and my head are doing all the things that have to be done. And I got home that night and I shared it with my husband. And I just said, I think I'm doing it wrong. I think I need to do this differently. I think I need to do this working woman professional thing differently. And so the passing of my coworker, his death by suicide, changed everything for me, because within a couple of weeks I was very sure of the decision that I needed to leave my career and do it differently, and do some things differently, not only for my family but also for the world that I live and work in. That I didn't just want to be part of one system and organization to make change. I felt like maybe I was called to do something different. Number one, be there for my kids, because I realized in talking with his mother, Brad's mother, that it was that parenting was just such an absolute privilege, and that I was letting my role as a parent kind of slip away by all of the hours I was spending in the car. And then I realized that maybe what I was doing in my job, I could do differently, that I could help people differently. And I had a couple shoulds that I was thinking about, but there were some things that I'm really proud of that I was able to do right in those moments. And I attributed a lot of it to the work that Amy and I did when we put together the book, because we had to think about all these things. And then I also attribute some of it to knowing instinctively that you have to love people first and be the soft place for them to land when the worst day of their life is happening. Being there for them first, loving them first. That is an important corporate action that people need to be equipped and trained for, so that they can show up in those moments with assuredness. Megan, I don't know, is that enough?
Oh yeah, there's a lot, and there's a lot of really good takeaways. I would say first and foremost, the fact that you acted and you acted quickly in contacting the next of kin, because it breaks my heart you can get down some of these like rabbit holes online where I'm seeing more and more people share stories about employees not showing up and they report it to HR and HR doesn't do anything, and like a week, 2 weeks will go by, and then finally they send a police officer and here like the poor person has like died in their apartment and they've been there for like a week without anyone knowing. I think even more recently there was like some kind of scandal. I cannot remember if anyone else remembers. It was a bigger organization. It was a large corporation that you would know, and I can't remember who it was, so I don't want to name blame the wrong company. But a woman had clocked in on Friday morning, died at her desk, was there all weekend. It wasn't until like Tuesday or Wednesday of the following week that finally someone knocked on her door and checked, and it was the odor that drew them to her door. But it's like she was at her desk, surrounded by her coworkers for like 4 days, 5 days before anyone knocked on the door, checked on her, did anything about it. And I think a lot of especially young people, they hear those stories and then they go, "This is why I never want to work for corporate. This is why I'm not going to give my all. This is why I'm not going to try hard." And we hear things like quiet quitting, and we blur that lines of setting boundaries and then just being defiant, because we hear these horrible stories. So to hear stories like yours where you quickly jumped on it, you acted on it, you built those relationships, you had those conversations, that story needs to be out so much more, which is one of the things that I really wanted to make sure this story got out there, because I want people to see that not all companies are built the same. Not all HR leaders are built the same, and that, there are companies out there that do truly care, and so give them a chance before you write them all off as being cold. I'd say the second thing that you really pointed out is how this affected you, not just as an HR leader, but as a coworker.
Yeah.
And, I'm just curious, what was some of the feedback and the responses you got from the other coworkers that, now you've announced it, this person's no longer with us. I think that's when the shoulding really starts on, oh my gosh, I should have known. Oh, he said this, and that should have been a red flag. And we start that spiral. I'm just curious, did you experience any of that with his coworkers, that after you announced it, that they all like almost like hindsight thought, oh, I should have known better?
No, and this is one of those big misconceptions that exist when we were talking about death by suicide. Number one, there is nothing that anyone can do or say that prompts someone to die by suicide and make that plan and execute the plan. There's nothing anyone can really say or predict that was predictable in this case. Like, I look at this young man, he was highly engaged, he was social, he was funny, he was smart, he was attractive, he was all the things that you would never guess. And so I think it's a real hazard to typecast someone. Now, you should pay attention to warning signs, and there are warning signs. There are clear warning signs that exist in some cases that mean this person needs additional care, love, attention, and support. But in this case, we were all shocked because this is a guy who we had relationship with, who was not isolated, who was not, alone. There are warning signs that show up that we should pay attention to, but he didn't exhibit them. And so there was a lot of shock, sadness, frustration, anger, all of those stages that were existing. And so that was really frustrating for me to see and not be able to solve problems for people. And that's part of what a lot of HR leaders deal with. We might know more of the situation and a lot of situations in our workplace, and we have to maintain objectivity and care and concern and kindness. And there's a certain way that we have to perform our duties in order to serve the company and the employees. And that's a treasure. And so a lot of HR leaders carry a lot with them. What I will say is that being educated on suicide prevention is important. Educating managers on suicide prevention is important. And also making sure that when managers have one-on-one meetings with their employees, that they are capable of asking personal questions to demonstrate care. And when I say personal questions, I mean, tell me how you're doing, and not just moving on when they say fine. Asking the follow-up questions is really important. The other piece of the puzzle that I think was really important in this case is, I am relentless about having the next of kin in the employee database. I'm relentless about it. It is a check. If I don't see it, I call and ask people for it. And if you aren't where you're supposed to be in a couple of hours and I can't get you after a text or a phone call, I do call that next of kin. And I have never shied away from it. And so for HR leaders, managers, people around, I want to really encourage you to not be afraid to do the check-in, because it is not uncommon when I'm working with an organization in an HR function or a manager role, and someone isn't where they're supposed to be and they are not responsive, I will call and leave a message for the next of kin that has a nice message saying who I am, that I'm calling because so and so is not on site today and I've not been able to reach them. I am just calling to make sure that nothing has happened to them. If you are able to get in contact with them, please have them reach out to me. And if you need anything, here is my contact information. I think that we have to stop being afraid of getting someone in trouble by calling when they blew off work. We have to stop being afraid of offending someone by caring. We need to do the right thing because in some cases, work is the only place that someone goes when they leave their house. And that's the only contact they have. And with so many remote workers, giving them an opportunity to be seen, be known, and be loved, that is part of the responsibility of the corporation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think, like, on that preventable case, certainly EAPs, I love, and I think it's the most underutilized benefit and resource. I think a lot of companies, they post it up in the break room, it's in the handbook. They mention it maybe once or twice a year, and then that's it. And it's just so underutilized. And there's so many lies and misunderstandings about how it works, who it's for. That's been one of my favorite things, is going into companies and resharing, like, hey, I have nothing to do with your EAP. I'm a separate wellness company coming in to talk to you about stress management or depression and loneliness and do this assessment with you. But I'm going to reshare your EAP and also teach you the benefits of it. And I know I had a really amazing experience where I was with a construction company and I was going around and I was doing a 4-hour presentation on health and well-being. And part of it was loneliness because these guys went to really remote locations, and that loneliness does really creep in, and they were concerned about their mental well-being. And when I got to the EAP, I was going over like, listen, this does not get back to your manager. This is completely confidential. It is there for your benefit, your family's benefit. And I think the most powerful thing that happened was one gentleman in the crowd stood up and turned to his fellow coworkers and goes, fellows, I've called the EAP. I've used it for myself and I've used it for my 16-year-old son. And in that moment, the whole energy in the room just shifted and you could see like the walls start to come down. But it really does take that one person to step up that's in the trenches with them to say, listen, I'm using it too. And so teaching people how to open that dialogue. And I think it starts with leadership on, hey, you know what? It's okay to have a bad day, rather than going through the motions on, "Hey, how are you today?" "Oh, I'm good." "Oh, yeah, me too," and move on. Feel free to open up that dialogue. "You know what? I'm actually having not such a great day. I got into a spat with my spouse, or I had some person cut me off this morning. I just feel like everything's going wrong. If I seem, out of sorts, it's nothing personal," because I think that's another thing is when we don't properly communicate that, our teams know when we're tense. Even though we don't know, they know. And then they start to internalize it. I think a lot of people go, "Were they mad at me?" And so I think being open, just, "Hey, I'm having a bad day. If I seem really curt today or I seem really off, it's nothing against you. It's just, it's one of those days." And it's like all of a sudden you'll hear them go, "Oh, yeah, I've been there. I know what you mean. Let me know what I can do to help." But I think the leaders need to step up and start that conversation. And even more to that point, you had mentioned about the preventative care. I recently got certified through SHRM for their workplace mental health ally certification. And in that, it actually teaches HR leaders, but anyone, how to develop safety plans. If you suspect that somebody is going to self harm or are thinking about suicide, or if they're in a domestic violence situation and you want to help them develop a safety plan to reach safety. But one of the things specifically for mental health that they taught was this thing called the Columbia Protocol. And so I encourage everyone to write that down and Google it later, Columbia Protocol. It is a easy to use resource. If you can put together an IKEA table, you can do the Columbia Protocol. And it is these 6 questions to ask if you suspect that somebody might be considering suicide. And it's really almost unnerving to go through the steps because the first question, it's kind of a softball of, hey, have you ever thought that the world would be a better place without you? Have you ever felt like you want to go to sleep and just never wake up? Well, if they answer yes to that question, the second question you ask is just point blank, have you ever considered killing yourself? And I made people ask that question to each other at a conference. I said, right now, I want you all to turn to each other and ask that question just straight out. And, later it's, hey, how many of you felt really uncomfortable saying those words? And like every hand went up. And I said, and this is the problem is that there's this weird stigma about talking about it. And that's not helping anyone. We have to normalize these conversations. We have to train our people on this. 94% of adults think that suicide is preventable, but they don't know how or they don't feel qualified. They think they need a certification to be able to use these tools. But what I love is that Columbia Protocol, it's scientifically backed to help prevent suicide, to help develop safety plans. It tells you when to call 988, when to call 911, when to reach out to a therapist. It's easy to follow. And they say you don't need to be certified, but if you want trained, they will offer to train you for free. And so that's a resource I'm sending everyone to. And even in my own life, shortly after I took this course and I learned this Columbia Protocol, I had somebody very, very near and dear to me, one of my family members, come out and say, hey, I had a 3-day stint with insomnia and went to see the doctor. They assessed me and I was put on suicide watch. You don't come back from that. You really don't. Once you start to have some of those mental health issues, that's with you. That's something that can come and go. It's something that needs to be monitored. And I'm so thankful that I now have this tool that when I have a conversation with them, I run them through the questions. And you know what? At the first couple times I did it, you try to work it into a conversation. You don't go, ahem, question one. Have you ever thought, you work it into a conversation, you put some empathy behind it, and it's become much more comfortable. And it's now to the point where like he knows I'm going to be asking these questions. but he's very open and honest with me. And I think that we do need to have more conversations like this. We need to have more trainings about what to do in these situations. So because you have found yourself in this situation before, in the workplace, what are 3 things that you would recommend we do to help prevent these situations? Like, what are 3 things that we should be doing ahead of a, situation?
Yeah. So I think one of the things, Megan, is knowing people's stories, because when there is a death by suicide, um, many people have an experience of that before that day in the workforce. Many people have either a family member, a friend, a neighbor somewhere in their history where there has been, and I would put this in the area of any of the traumatic events that we experience in life. Amy and I were very careful in our book not to re traumatize people as they were reading about their grief and about other people's stories of grief. And one of the things that was very concerning to me as I was navigating this tragic event in the workplace was thinking about the employees that I had a relationship with who would be triggered to have a traumatic response based on a piece of their personal history. I was very concerned about that. And those were the people that I made an immediate outreach to and checked in on. So the first thing is know the personal histories and the stories of your employees. Know them, know your people, love your people. The second is don't be looking for information when the bad things happen. Have a plan, have access to information before it. Have a folder where you have different scenarios and the data. Be very vigilant about paperwork, because the last thing you want to be looking for is a phone number or a mailing address when there is a tragic event. The third thing is preventative is use your EAP. Don't just know what your EAP is, but actually use it. Go through and try. Every place that I've ever worked, one of the first things I do in my onboarding is I use the EAP. I deploy it on myself. And sometimes, as part of the process of evaluating the risks, when a company doesn't have an EAP, um, that should be a priority. That should be if you have a small business, it might be more difficult. But if you have a growing mid-sized business, you should have an EAP. A lot of healthcare plans will have an EAP included in it, and so you have to actually do the work to figure it out, for HR leaders specifically. But I would encourage even leaders that are not in the HR space, but who are in the management space and higher, is use the EAP, understand how to access it and what's included and if it's effective. In the back of the book that Amy and I created, there's a ton of resources for different scenarios, including suicide prevention, domestic violence, lots of resources most of them are free resources, text resources. And in the immediate days of this tragedy, I had photocopied pages from the book that I passed out to all the leaders around the company so that they had the text support, the phone numbers, that they had resources available to them, just because we needed to have multiple places for resources. I'm going to keep going on this too, because resources is my number 3. Megan, is that have resources in multiple places. It's not just email. It's not just on your phone. I have in my email signatures at different companies, I would have our a crisis hotline as part of my email signature. It's part of resourcing the managers. It's part of resourcing your executive team. It's part of resourcing admins, getting as many people to have access to information as possible. And then I'm just going to add a fourth. That's the last thing that I'll add on this part is nobody does it well alone. So have a partner with you if you are in a difficult position to deliver care or deliver bad news. Have a partner with you. Have a third person in the room for these difficult conversations. I was very grateful for the colleague that walked with me through this journey and delivering some of this really terrible information. And that goes for managers too. Managers, sometimes, you have to be in the room with someone. You have to have those one-on-one meetings with consistency. And I got one more then, Megan. I'm sorry, I'm adding a fifth. Educate people on the gift of seeing something and saying something. educate people on how that is a demonstration of care. When you speak up out of care for someone and continue to push forward until someone does something to help someone or to reach out to someone or to follow up with someone, that really matters. And so this is a workforce that has a lot of people across the United States and the world right now. We have people remote. We have people working strange hours. We have people doing projects. We have people who are solopreneurs now. Like we have such a dispersed workforce that humans were not made to be alone. Humans were made to live in community. And as people leaders and people who care about other humans, we've got to be showing up for each other. We've got to find ways to have partnerships. We've got to have ways to demonstrate care because grief is painful and people are grieving all sorts of things. And when the things that people experience in life become so intense that they think the only choice they have is is to not live anymore, there is a ripple effect that impacts so many. And so, my agreement to come in and have this conversation today was because I'm really convinced that this young man's life should mean something more than his story ending before the age of 30. And I take him with me every day when I drive my kids to school because I get to drive my kids to school. And I take him with me when I do work with organizations, specifically when I'm helping organizations treat their employees in a way that gives them dignity and freedom. And so I'm convinced that, I was in the privileged position of learning the sad news and delivering that sad news and caring for his family in certain ways and his coworkers in certain ways because I was not going to let the moment pass without taking action. And so, my big should was I don't want to have any shoulds. I want to have I dids. And my big I did is I left my career and decided to do something differently because this young man's life mattered in such a way to me that I didn't want to let it go without actually doing something.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the research is very clear that, suicide is also a little bit of a social contagion, that people that are touched by it are at an increased risk. And so you think about all those people at your last job where this guy was, they're now all at an increased risk because they have been in this situation, they have experienced this. And, to your point about that relationships, I can't teach enough about it that whether I'm teaching David Rock's SCARF model on the five main social stress triggers, and R stands for relatedness. You look at Brene Brown's work on, are we feeling a sense of belonging or are we trying to fit in? That the opposite of belonging is fitting in. And where do we feel like we are in our organizations? And even one of the things I was recently teaching on is, positive psychology at its core has this PERMA model. And the R in PERMA is about relationships and how that loneliness, not feeling connected, not having a tribe really can set us off and set us spiraling down. And so it's so important to build those relationships. And I know that even now, especially a lot of younger generations want to view the workplace and work as very contractual. And I'm coming in here, I just want my paycheck and I want to make an impact. But if you're not going to let me make an impact, then I'm not putting forth the effort. I'm not trying to make those connections. I think what's really remarkable about Gen Z in particular is they're really big on that social impact. And if you really want to engage them in the workforce, how are they making a difference and inspiring? And if we're not inspiring them within the organization, if we're not building those relationships, then you're not going to be able to market to them that they're having any kind of impact outside the organization either. And that's why I think there's this disconnect on, they don't put in the work, they only do the bare minimum. Well, because they don't feel like they're making that impact. And it has to start internally and then go externally. And I think a lot of companies are missing that mark and building those relationships. And we are at this new era where, like you said, employees could be anywhere in the world. We have this weird hybrid remote workforce that some of us aren't even in the same time zone. We're not doing things at similar times. It's hard to build those connections. what would be your recommendation, to help people to really spark some of those internal connections, build some of that trust, have more of that openness? What have you seen that's actually worked? Because I know there's a lot of information out there and some of it's like kumbaya stuff that I don't think actually works. What have you implemented that you've seen that's actually really worked for your organizations?
So every place that I've ever worked in the history of my getting a paycheck life, there's a few things that are essential. One is when an organization has values that they associate with their existence, those values have to be defined and behaviorized so people know how to act and engaging in a social contract with each other at work. And so those values are really important. This is a big chunk of my work, but it's what I've been doing forever. And so it almost comes naturally to me, because behaviors, humans need to understand the construct that they are socially engaged in. So if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I'm going to dumb it down a lot: physical safety, psychological safety, acceptance, care, and love. Okay. So if we can create a workplace that meets those things, and then we operate in such a way that humans have the freedom to live and work at their best level because they understand what operational excellence is for that workplace and that environment, they can be free to do all kinds of great things with predictable patterns of behavior. Dr. Henry Cloud in the book Integrity sums it down. And Henry Cloud, he's the guy that does all the boundaries books. So guess what? If we're talking about values at work, we have to talk about boundaries at work too, because humans are creatures that need to know what the rules are. And sometimes we have to create our own set of rules to protect our values. One of the statements that I've said ad nauseum, that if you know me for more than 5 minutes, you've heard it: when you live your life according to your values, you will always have the life you deserve. We need to be able to have workplaces that allow humans to know what is expected and needed in order to show up and be in that social contract. Conversely, employees, humans, they need to know what they're about. And so I leverage strengths-based leadership models to help humans perform at the highest level of their capabilities based on how they are hardwired and made, because humans are truly unrepeatable gifts. There's no two that are going to show up in the exact same way and perform functions in the exact same way and solve problems in the exact same way. So when we start to recognize that that human in front of me is not just an employee, but they are an unrepeatable gift, and I have the privilege and responsibility to elevate what they can do and what they will do and what they shall do at the highest level, at the service of the organization, which is hopefully in the service of a need that exists in the world, we can do great things. And if this feels kumbaya, it's actually just really good business.
Yeah.
It's really good business, verified by Gallup, verified by all of the best researchers all over the world. It's not just in the United States, it's global. The thing is, when humans are given an opportunity to perform their tasks out of a place of strength, they not only are better, they're not only more precise, they also feel better. And you know what happens at the end of a good day of work? You don't go home and kick your dog. You go home and you help an old lady cross the street. Like, when humans have a good experience of work, they go into the life with an even better experience for everyone around them. So, yeah, like, death by suicide is a problem that doesn't just impact the person who is lost, who we lose. Death by suicide is a problem that impacts everyone who has had the privilege of interacting with that human being who is an unrepeatable gift. And as awkward as it is, you can't just move on. As awkward as it is, you can't just pretend that there was a reason why it happened. It had nothing to do with all the people around them. We have to take that opportunity and say, now what can I learn from this thing? What can I learn from this moment? What can we do? How can we recognize all the other humans in this environment are now touched and impacted? And that's where my biggest care is on how we move forward. Amy was amazing in the book, and the way that we've discussed suicide in the book, we were so careful to address the phrasing as death by suicide, not committing suicide, because that term, committing suicide, adds such a layer of unnecessary angst. And so when we talk about the unrepeatable gift of human life being lost in this way, it gives an additional level of dignity to all of those who felt that there was no other way to move forward. And I think about this young man every day. And I think about all of my coworkers and all of the people who had an opportunity to interact with him and see his laughter, see his joy, know his sense of humor. There's a list of things. And so I made it a point to honor his life in very practical ways with those small groups of employees who had the most interactions with him. And I think that is another piece of the puzzle. If you at a workplace do have an experience of death by suicide, don't feel like that you just have to move on. Do ensure that there is a bereavement time for employees that work closely with that person. Update your policies if you need to, but bereavement time for coworkers, that should be something that becomes part of the story. Having wellness resources. There was a list of resources that I was given when I reached out to my HR experts group. And some of them were beautiful. Going beyond the planting of a tree, the naming of a conference room was one of the ways that they had helped their employees to navigate it. Having a picture in that conference room was one of them. There's an organization called the Center for Creative Arts Therapy that literally gave me 25 different things to think about in the after. And so again, I go back to, don't do the should thing where, oh, I should have done this. If you are a leader that has influence in an organization, prioritize the crisis response to this and some of the other crises that exist amongst employees. Domestic violence was another thing Megan mentioned. That's another piece of that thing that you don't think about until the unimaginable happens at work. And there's probably a list of 5 or 6 things that there's no real HR training policy handbook that you get when you start the first day of work somewhere. And so you have to leverage your colleagues, your peers, and the experiences and learn when you see something that happens somewhere else. Make a plan for how you would deal with it within your organization so that you don't should all over yourself when the things happen.
Yeah, I think the big things here are you don't need a special certification. I think a lot of people delay action because they feel I'm not qualified, I'm not capable of doing this. And I think that can really spiral. I think that we need to give ourselves permission to at least take up action. I think when we are pressed with these kinds of situations, the biggest thing that I would say for somebody to take away from this is that when you find yourself of, I should have done this, I should have done that, you know what? Give yourself the grace and that you did the best you could with the resources you had at the time. And, forgive yourself for, not knowing. And this is an education. This is a learning piece. And you know what? When we're dealing with things like suicide, you know what? You did what you could at the time with the knowledge that you had. Give yourself that grace and then focus on what can I do now? In the aftermath of this, what can I do? What actions can I take to help now? And let that be your focus rather than being stuck in that freeze. Because I think there are a lot of people that really get stuck there and they give up. And I think that's what feeds kind of that social contagion that puts them at higher risk is because they are beating themselves up. There is a little bit of that almost like a survivor's guilt that goes with this. And so, I know we're getting closer to our end of time. Holly, I'd love to hear like your perspective. Should you find yourself in this situation where a coworker, somebody under you, someone close to you does die by suicide, what would be your advice like for whenever they're having that reaction? Like what helped you? What are some things like looking back? Should I find myself in this situation again? This is what I'm going to keep in mind.
Megan, before I answer that, I'm going to just see if my other brain wants to say anything. If Amy wants to add to that, because she has shared so much of this journey with me. Amy, is there anything that you want to add to this conversation?
Thank you. There's so much. There's so much running through my mind as I'm listening to you both. But I think one thing, Megan, you said, what's worked? What is one way to like make this whole situation better, this whole experience any better? And one thing that keeps running through my mind is about raising consciousness and also being conscious. So things like this, right, are like as much consciousness as you can raise about these situations, but also that we're all connected and that work is personal and that leaders need to educate and get educated about where are the lines? Where are the lines between work and personal? Because I think that's really hard to determine. And like you said, Megan, it's preventing people from taking action. But I love the fact that elevating people's consciousness around how humans are connected, not just protocols on how to handle certain situations, which are extremely important. And I love that a plan built with love and care is awesome. But also having some education about emotional and social intelligence and basic human emotional needs and that whole psychology behind it is really foundational for communicating, interacting and creating relationships around this. So I'll just stop there because Paula, you were going to answer a question.
I love it. I love that, Amy. I was just going to say my number one tip is be prepared before something happens so that you can take a minute to breathe and grieve. You've got to take care of yourself. And one of the things that I do, and I recommend to everyone is when there is a death of any sort, send a copy of this via Amazon to the person who is closest to that's experiencing that loss. The book won't die, flowers will, right? So this book has been an incredible handbook and resource for so many people. You can read the reviews on Amazon. When there is an experience of tragic loss at the workplace, what Amy said is right. Work is personal. And what we do at work sometimes comes home with us, whether or not we want it to. And so anytime that you can give someone a resource that they can have on their coffee table at home that someone else can pick up and be served by is a huge gift. And so, this is not a commercial for the book, but Amy and I knew that we needed to get this book into the hands of as many people as possible because Americans are grieving. Isolation is not the answer. And providing an opportunity for someone to have practical wisdom for living hope is what is going to get us out of that dark space of I'm alone and no one needs me.
Absolutely. And that's, kind of piggybacks one of my biggest pet peeves with organizations is, when we talk about the things that we're going to offer, the things we're going to do to be preventing, the things that we need to keep in mind when these tragedies occur, I feel like a lot of times we just want to check boxes and, oh, well, we have an EAP and we check that box. Even the wellness, you had mentioned about wellness programs and stuff. And I mean, obviously that's where I flourish. I'm so sick of, well, we hear that walking is really good for mental health. So let's do a step challenge and we're just going to check that box. I think, Amy pointed out, and I'll point out again, is making those plans with love and care. I think wellness should be the same way that a lot of these things can be preventable. We can do a lot to help and be more aware and be more conscious, but we have to be willing to take the time and the resources needed to really put programs into place. And so when we are looking at the benefits we're going to offer, the type of bereavement packages we're going to offer, the type of wellness programs we're going to offer, we shouldn't go at it with a mindset of, okay, we're just going to check the box. Yes, we have this, moving on, but what are we doing with those resources? How are they really making an impact? Making sure that we're coming back and we're evaluating them. Are people using them? If not, why aren't they using them? Is there misinformation on it? Is there, a lack of knowledge that they're out there? Do we need to tell them and tell them again? What are we really doing? And, that's why my big push is, even though, yes, I'm a wellness company. Yes, I'm a personal trainer and a health coach, and I love talking nutrition and making people do burpees and push-ups until their arms fall off. I think right now, more than anything, what people need is that awareness of mental resilience, of the positive psychology, not just for the employees to know how to navigate their own mental well-being, but for leadership. What is leadership's role in their employees' well-being, mentally, emotionally, physically? We need to be more proactive. And to Amy's point on where are those lines for work and life, we're remote now. You are looking inside my home. Holly's had her dog barking. My daughter, 2 minutes before we started this, came screaming and running and crying in. That line between where this work is and where my personal life is so thin. It is so integrated now. I think that organizations need to take more of that love and care approach. And I think it would benefit not just their organization, but also all the people within the organization and those that they serve, their end users, their clients. That's going to come out, but that's really where it starts. And that's going to be my final thought. Holly, I don't know if you have any final thoughts, and then we'll open it up to questions.
No, I'm just plan ahead. I love people hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just add too, is it's just funny because there is no business without people. There is no business without your employees. There is no business without your customers. These are all people. Business is personal. Business is about people. It's all about people. So you have to reach people and connect with people, and realize that you're impacting people in every way. And you also need people's input to what you're doing. So it goes both ways.
Yeah. Anyone have any questions or anything that they'd like to add? Because we're going to be putting this up on YouTube. I'm going to be sharing it with my resources. I'm hoping there's some good nuggets here that people can take away, things to think about, things that they can implement, research on their own. I'm opening it up to anybody here.
Well, I think my big takeaway, Megan and Holly, is paying attention to colleagues. That if people feel connected, there's less likelihood of them hurting themselves. So it's really helping people, especially the introverts, helping introverts to feel like they're part of a team and part of the community. And that's why remote work is really hard right now, because introverts can work from home and pretend, but they're dying inside. So it's really hard to pull those people out, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I think, Bruce, to your point, being connected with people, because Megan, to your example of the woman who was actually in her office at work and still nobody was connected enough or conscious enough to be like, or proactive enough to see something, say something, take action. So I think Holly, you mentioned check-ins as a preventive thing, and that's and even with Gallup research, right? That even 15-minute, even 5 minutes, there's debates for 5-minute check-ins with your employees, and there's like a few questions that you can ask, like Holly was saying. The quality of those conversations is really important, but it's not difficult. It's pretty simple. And everyone should be educated in doing that with each other as a leader, but also as a coworker.
I did
But
actually. Go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, to Amy's point, that I lead a couple of networking groups, and when I need to do a better job when I don't see someone for a couple of weeks, to just text them, "Hey, is everything okay?" That little step goes a long way. That's my takeaway. I got to really pay more attention.
Yeah, and I did look it up. The company it was Wells Fargo. So like I say, it was a big organization. So this is an organization that has EAPs, that has wellness programs, that has all the Slack channels and teams and all the ways to connect. I'm sure that they have those resources. Their HR has probably like a numerous amount of people working in HR, and yet this still happened in their organization. So we can't just leave it on to, oh, this is HR's job, or this is like we all need to be connected. We all need to be proactive. But that was why that story shocked me so much, because I'm like, this is such like a big they have the resources, but just because you have the resources and you've checked the box doesn't mean that it's working.
That's right. And things are still going to happen. You can do everything perfect. And then there's still humans that are in pain, that make a decision that impact themselves, but others as well. And that's the area that I focus on my show up. I make sure that in those moments I show up in the best way that I can. And so, those tips again are, have the folder ready, have some pre-written communications about something difficult like this. If you're an HR leader and you're just tuning in because you need to figure this out, get that ready, get your game plan and your resources ready. Number 2, take a moment for yourself to pray, breathe, cry, do whatever you need. Give yourself those 2 minutes. I always say 90 seconds of breathing at 90-degree angles with your feet on the ground, your elbows on your lap. your chin a level with your desk, 90 seconds to just breathe in and have that experience, and then go do what you need to do. Have your partner with you, have a third person in the room so that you're never in these difficult moments alone. Be clear with the people who are impacted that they should take time off to care for themselves. Make sure that it's clear that the bereavement policy is covering them in these moments, because people at work are people, and do something meaningful to honor that life of the colleague, to provide that closure. We never get over grief. We move through grief. We move through grief in cycles, and so it's not the only time that it's going to matter. Use your EAP, be familiar with resources, and grieve yourself. Give yourself time to actually grieve if the unimaginable happens.
Awesome. That's a great summary. I'm going to leave it there. Holly, how can people find you if they want to reach out to you? Maybe they need to bring you into their organization, or they want a copy of your book. How do they find you?
I'm always on LinkedIn. Everywhere you look, I'm there on LinkedIn, but you can also find me at hollyjoy.info on the internet, and connect with me there, know what's going on. And if you need someone to walk with you on your journey, I'm there. Get resources for the book on Amazon, the place where we buy all the things.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today.